In the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan, where death whispers through every valley and courage is measured in heartbeats, the most elite military snipers in the world face their greatest humiliation. Armed with million-dollar equipment, years of specialized training, and reputations built on impossible shots, they had one job: eliminate 3 high-value terrorist targets positioned strategically across a narrow mountain pass. Shot after shot echoed through the canyon. Bullet after bullet found nothing but rock and air. Hours passed. Ammunition dwindled. Frustration mounted. The world's deadliest marksmen were failing when it mattered most. But sometimes in the chaos of war, heroes emerge from the most unexpected places. Sometimes the person who saves the day isn't the one trained to kill, but the one trained to keep others alive. Sometimes all it takes is one man, one rifle, and one impossible shot that defies every law of physics and probability. This is the story of how a military cook armed with nothing but determination and an old hunting rifle accomplished what an entire team of elite snipers could not. This is the story of the shot heard around the world, the bullet that traveled through 3 targets in a single, physics-defying moment that will be talked about in military circles for decades to come. What you're about to read will challenge everything you think you know about skill, luck, and the unpredictable nature of heroism in combat zones. The morning sun cast long shadows across Forward Operating Base Thunder, a small military outpost nestled in the treacherous mountains of eastern Afghanistan. Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson wiped the sweat from his forehead as he prepared breakfast for the 200 soldiers stationed at the base. At 34 years old, Marcus had been serving as a military cook for 12 years, a job that kept him busy feeding hungry soldiers, but far from the action that defined most military careers. Marcus wasn't like the other cooks in the Army. Before enlisting, he had grown up on a farm in rural Montana, where hunting wasn't just a hobby, it was survival. His father had taught him to shoot when he was 8 years old, and by the time he was 16, Marcus could drop a deer at 400 yards with an old Winchester rifle that had belonged to his grandfather. He had natural talent, the kind that couldn't be taught in military academies or sniper schools. But life had taken him down a different path, and now instead of taking lives, he spent his days keeping soldiers fed and their morale high. The base had been on high alert for 3 weeks. Intelligence reports indicated that a group of high-value targets had been spotted in the surrounding mountains, planning what appeared to be a major attack on coalition forces. These weren't ordinary insurgents. They were experienced commanders who had been responsible for coordinating attacks across the region for years. Their elimination was considered crucial for the safety of thousands of Allied troops. Captain Sarah Rodriguez, the base commander, had been working closely with a special operations team that had arrived 2 weeks earlier. The team included some of the most elite snipers in the military. Sergeant First Class David Shun, a Marine with over 50 confirmed kills and a reputation for impossible long-distance shots. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, an Army sniper who held the record for the longest confirmed kill by a female soldier. And Corporal Mike Stevens, a Navy SEAL sniper who had trained at the most advanced sniper schools in the world. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were the best of the best, handpicked for this mission because of their exceptional skills and proven track records in combat zones around the world. Each of them had years of specialized training, experience with the most advanced sniper rifles and equipment available, and the kind of mental discipline that allowed them to remain calm and focused under the most extreme pressure. The targets had been located in a narrow mountain pass about 800 meters from base. Intelligence indicated that 3 men had taken position behind natural rock formations that provided excellent cover while giving them a clear view of the valley below. From their position, they could observe and potentially attack any convoy or patrol that moved through the area, making them an immediate and serious threat to coalition operations. For the past week, the sniper team had been attempting to eliminate these targets. They had set up in multiple positions around the base, using every advantage they could find. They had state-of-the-art equipment, rifles worth more than most people's cars, scopes that could clearly identify targets at distances that seemed impossible, and ammunition designed specifically for long-range precision shooting. But something was going wrong. Shot after shot missed their marks. The snipers would line up their shots, account for wind speed and direction, calculate the bullet drop over the distance, control their breathing, and squeeze the trigger with the precision that had made them legends in the special operations community. Yet somehow, their bullets were finding nothing but rock and empty air. The problem wasn't their skill or their equipment. The mountain pass where the targets were positioned created unique environmental conditions that were affecting their shots in ways they had never encountered before. The wind patterns in the narrow canyon were unpredictable and constantly changing. The elevation and atmospheric pressure were creating bullet trajectories that didn't match their calculations. The heat rising from the valley floor was creating optical distortions that made their scopes unreliable. Marcus had been watching the sniper team's frustration grow with each passing day. He would see them returning to the base after long hours in position, their faces showing the kind of exhaustion and disappointment that came from professional failure. These were soldiers who had never missed when it mattered, and now they were facing a situation that challenged everything they thought they knew about their craft. The cook found himself thinking about the problem more and more. During quiet moments in the kitchen, while preparing meals or cleaning equipment, Marcus would look out toward the mountain pass and consider the challenge from a different perspective. He had grown up hunting in mountains not unlike these, where wind patterns could change in seconds and where understanding the land itself was often more important than having the most expensive equipment. On the 8th day of failed attempts, Marcus approached Captain Rodriguez with an unusual request. He had been thinking about the problem and believed he might have a solution, but he needed permission to try something that would seem crazy to most military commanders. Marcus wanted to attempt a shot that had defeated the best snipers in the world. The captain's initial reaction was exactly what Marcus had expected. She reminded him that he was a cook, not a sniper, and that the military had sent their most qualified people to handle this situation. But Marcus persisted, explaining his background and his observations about the environmental conditions that were causing the problems. He pointed out that his hunting experience in similar terrain might give him insights that traditional sniper training couldn't provide. Captain Rodriguez was facing a difficult decision. The targets in the mountain pass were becoming more active, and intelligence suggested they were preparing to move to a different location where they would be even harder to reach. Time was running out, and her expert snipers were no closer to success than they had been a week earlier. The situation was desperate enough that even an unconventional solution was worth considering. After consulting with the sniper team leaders, Captain Rodriguez made a decision that would have seemed impossible under normal circumstances. She gave Marcus permission to make one attempt, using equipment borrowed from the sniper team. It would be his only chance, and if he failed, they would have to accept that this particular mission was beyond their current capabilities. The news spread quickly through the base. Soldiers who had been following the sniper team's efforts with great interest were now talking about the cook who thought he could succeed where the experts had failed. Some were supportive, remembering Marcus's reputation as someone who could handle himself in any situation. Others were skeptical, wondering if desperation had led their commander to make a poor decision. Marcus spent that evening preparing for what would either be the most important shot of his life or a humiliating public failure. He studied maps of the area, reviewed intelligence reports about the target's positions, and examined the equipment he would be using. Most importantly, he spent time thinking about the environmental factors that had been defeating the other snipers. The rifle he would use was a state-of-the-art precision weapon, far more advanced than the old Winchester he had learned to shoot with as a child. But Marcus understood that the most sophisticated equipment in the world was useless if the person using it didn't understand the environment they were working in. He needed to think like a hunter, not like a trained military sniper, and trust the instincts he had developed during years of hunting in challenging mountain terrain. As he prepared for sleep that night, Marcus felt the weight of expectation from everyone on the base. The expert snipers were skeptical, but curious to see what approach he would take. The other soldiers were hoping for success that would boost morale and eliminate a serious threat. Captain Rodriguez was counting on him to accomplish something that would justify her unusual decision to let a cook attempt a mission that had defeated her best specialists. The next morning would determine whether Marcus Thompson would return to his kitchen as a cook who had failed spectacularly in front of his entire base, or whether he would accomplish something that would be remembered and discussed in military circles for years to come. The stage was set for either triumph or humiliation, and there would be no middle ground. The pre-dawn air was crisp and still as Marcus Thompson made his way to the observation position that the sniper team had been using for the past week. He carried the borrowed rifle carefully, along with a small bag containing ammunition and basic equipment. Unlike the elaborate setups that the professional snipers had constructed, Marcus planned to keep things simple. Sergeant First Class David Chun had volunteered to accompany Marcus as a spotter, despite his obvious skepticism about the entire operation. Chun was a professional who respected the chain of command, but his body language made it clear that he considered this exercise a waste of time and potentially dangerous for everyone involved. He had spent years perfecting his craft and had succeeded in missions that others had considered impossible. Yet somehow this particular challenge had defeated him completely. As they climbed toward the observation position, Chun began explaining the technical challenges they had been facing. The wind in the canyon was constantly shifting direction and speed, making it impossible to calculate accurate corrections for bullet trajectory. The heat rising from the valley floor created optical distortions that made the high-powered scopes unreliable. The distance to the targets was at the extreme edge of what their weapons could handle effectively, and the natural rock formations provided the targets with excellent cover that left only small portions of their bodies exposed. Marcus listened carefully to Chen's explanations, but his mind was working differently than a trained military sniper's would. Instead of thinking about technical specifications and ballistic calculations, he was remembering hunts in the Montana mountains where conditions had been similar. He recalled mornings when the wind would swirl unpredictably through narrow canyons, and how his father had taught him to read the environment rather than rely entirely on calculations and equipment. When they reached the observation position, Marcus immediately understood why the other snipers had been having problems. The elevated position provided an excellent view of the target area, but it also exposed the shooter to the full force of the swirling wind patterns that moved through the canyon. The professional snipers had been trying to compensate for these conditions using their training and technology, but Marcus suspected that a different approach might be more effective. Instead of setting up in the established sniper position, Marcus began looking for alternatives. He spent nearly an hour exploring different locations along the ridge, testing wind conditions, and evaluating sight lines to the target area. Chun followed him with growing impatience, repeatedly pointing out that they had already determined that the established position provided the best combination of concealment, stability, and clear shots. Finally, Marcus found what he was looking for, a natural depression in the rock formation that provided protection from the shifting winds while still offering a clear view of the target area. The position was lower than where the other snipers had been shooting from, which meant the angle would be different and potentially more challenging, but Marcus believed it would eliminate many of the environmental factors that had been causing problems. Chun was openly skeptical of the new position. According to his training and experience, the lower elevation would make the shot more difficult and would potentially compromise their concealment. But Marcus had different reasons for choosing the location. In the protected depression, the wind conditions were much more stable and predictable. The lower angle would reduce the impact of heat distortion rising from the valley floor. Most importantly, the position felt right to someone who had grown up hunting in similar terrain. As Marcus began setting up his equipment, Chun started providing detailed intelligence about the three targets. They had been identified as senior commanders in the insurgent network, responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces throughout the region. Intelligence indicated that they were planning a major operation that could result in significant casualties if they weren't stopped. The first target was positioned behind a large boulder approximately 800 meters away, with only his head and upper torso visible when he moved. The second target was slightly farther, maybe 820 meters, positioned in a natural crack in the rock formation that provided excellent cover. The third target was the most challenging, located 840 meters away and positioned so that only small portions of his body were visible at any given time. What made the situation even more complex was the way the three targets were positioned relative to each other. They formed a rough triangle across the narrow pass, which meant that engaging one target would likely alert the others and give them time to take better cover or potentially escape. The ideal solution would be to eliminate all three targets quickly enough that none of them would have time to react. Marcus studied the target area through the rifle's scope, taking his time to understand the layout and the patterns of movement he could observe. Unlike the military snipers who had been focused on making precise individual shots, Marcus found himself thinking about the problem differently. His hunting experience had taught him to think about multiple targets and the relationships between them. As he continued his observation, Marcus noticed something that the other snipers had apparently missed or dismissed as unimportant. The three targets weren't positioned randomly. They were aligned in a way that might make an extraordinary shot possible. If the timing was perfect and the conditions were exactly right, there might be a brief moment when all three targets could be engaged with a single bullet. Chen was skeptical when Marcus explained what he was considering. The idea of a single bullet eliminating multiple targets was something that happened in movies, not in real combat situations. The physics involved would be incredibly complex, requiring perfect timing, exact positioning, and more luck than any reasonable person should count on. Even if such a shot were theoretically possible, the chances of success would be so low that attempting it would be essentially gambling with the entire mission. But Marcus had grown up hearing stories about shots that seemed impossible until someone made them. His grandfather had told him about hunters who could drop 2 deer with a single bullet when conditions were perfect. His father had shown him how a well-placed shot could sometimes accomplish more than multiple average shots. Marcus understood that what he was considering was extraordinarily difficult, but he also believed it might be their best chance for success. The morning progressed slowly as Marcus continued studying the target area and waiting for the right conditions. Chun provided regular updates about wind speed and direction, while Marcus watched for patterns in the target's movements and behavior. Professional snipers are taught to be patient, but Marcus was displaying a different kind of patience. The patience of a hunter who understands that the perfect moment might only last for a few seconds. Around mid-morning, the conditions began to align in ways that Marcus had been hoping for. The wind in the canyon had settled into a more predictable pattern, blowing consistently from the southwest at about 8 miles per hour. The heat distortion from the valley floor was minimal due to cloud cover that had moved in during the night. Most importantly, the three targets had settled into positions that created the alignment Marcus needed for his planned shot. Chan was monitoring radio communications and reported that the targets seemed to be preparing for some kind of movement. Intelligence suggested they might be planning to relocate within the next few hours, which would make them much more difficult to track and engage. The window of opportunity was closing, and this might be their only chance to eliminate all three targets before they disappeared into the vast mountain wilderness. Marcus began his final preparations, checking and double-checking every detail of his equipment and setup. Unlike the high-tech approach that the military snipers have been using, Marcus was relying more on instinct and experience than on calculations and technology. He was thinking like someone who had grown up hunting for survival, where missing a shot could mean going hungry for days. The first target moved into position behind his boulder, exposing his head and upper chest in a way that would provide a clear shot. Marcus tracked him through the scope, noting his exact position and the timing of his movements. A few minutes later, the second target became visible in the crack in the rock formation, creating the second point in the triangle that Marcus had been visualizing. Chen was growing increasingly nervous as he realized that Marcus was actually planning to attempt the impossible shot he had described earlier. The spotter's training and experience told him that this was a mistake, that Marcus should focus on one target at a time and try to achieve at least one success rather than risk complete failure by attempting something that was essentially impossible. But Marcus had made his decision. He had studied the target area for hours, had identified the exact conditions he needed, and believed that the next few minutes would provide his only opportunity to accomplish something that would eliminate all three threats simultaneously. As he settled into his firing position and began controlling his breathing in preparation for the shot, Marcus felt the same calm confidence that had always come over him during the most challenging hunts of his youth. The third target moved into position, completing the alignment that Marcus had been waiting for. For a brief moment, all three targets were visible and positioned in a way that made the impossible shot theoretically possible. Marcus knew that the moment would only last for a few seconds, and that hesitation would mean losing the opportunity forever. Chun held his breath as he watched Marcus make his final adjustments and prepare to take the shot that would either make him a legend or confirm everyone's suspicions that sending a cook to do a sniper's job had been a terrible mistake. Time seemed to slow down as Marcus Thompson settled into his final firing position. Through the scope, he could see all three targets clearly positioned in the precise alignment he had been waiting for hours to achieve. The first target was visible behind his boulder, the second was exposed in the crack in the rock formation, and the third had just moved into position at the farthest point of the triangle. Marcus knew that this perfect alignment would only last for seconds, and that any hesitation would mean losing the opportunity forever. Chen was barely breathing as he watched Marcus make his final adjustments. The spotter had seen hundreds of shots fired by expert snipers, but he had never witnessed anyone attempting what Marcus was about to try. According to every principle of ballistics and military sniper training, what Marcus was planning was essentially impossible. Yet something about the cook's calm confidence was beginning to make Chen wonder if there might be more to this attempt than he had initially believed. Marcus controlled his breathing exactly as his father had taught him 30 years earlier during their first hunting trip together. He let his heart rate settle into the steady rhythm that had always preceded his most successful shots. Unlike the high-tech approach that military snipers used, with complex calculations for wind speed, bullet drop, and atmospheric conditions, Marcus was relying on instincts that had been developed through years of hunting in challenging mountain terrain. The wind in the canyon had settled into the consistent southwestern pattern that Marcus had been monitoring all morning. At 8 miles per hour, it was strong enough to affect bullet trajectory, but predictable enough to compensate for. The cloud cover was keeping heat distortion to a minimum, which meant his scope would give him a clear view of the target area. Most importantly, the three targets had remained in their positions long enough for Marcus to study their exact locations and calculate the trajectory needed for his planned shot. Chun whispered final wind readings and confirmed that radio intelligence indicated the targets were preparing to move within the next few minutes. This was their last chance to eliminate all three threats before they disappeared into the vast mountain wilderness, where finding them again would be nearly impossible. Marcus made his final scope adjustment and found his point of aim. Instead of targeting any of the three men directly, he was aiming for a specific point in space that would allow the bullet to pass through all three targets if his calculations and timing were perfect. The physics involved were incredibly complex, requiring the bullet to maintain enough velocity and accuracy to remain lethal after passing through the first and second targets. The shot would need to travel 840 meters to reach the farthest target, passing through the other two targets along the way. At that distance, bullet drop would be significant, and even slight errors in wind compensation could cause the bullet to miss by several feet. The margin for error was essentially zero, and Marcus understood that he would only get one chance. Through the scope, Marcus could see the first target adjusting his position behind the boulder. The man was a senior commander responsible for coordinating attacks that had killed dozens of coalition soldiers over the past year. Intelligence reports indicated he was planning a major offensive that could result in hundreds of casualties if he wasn't stopped. The second target was partially visible through the crack in the rock formation, examining what appeared to be a map or document. He had been identified as the group's primary strategist, responsible for selecting targets and planning attacks throughout the region. His elimination would significantly disrupt the insurgent network's ability to coordinate future operations. The third target, positioned at the farthest point, was the group's senior explosives expert. He had been responsible for constructing the improvised explosive devices that had been causing casualties among coalition forces for months. His knowledge and skills made him one of the most dangerous individuals in the entire insurgent network. Marcus knew that eliminating all three men with a single shot would not only remove immediate threats, but would also deal a devastating blow to the entire insurgent organization in the region. The psychological impact of such an extraordinary shot would spread throughout the insurgent network, potentially deterring others from taking leadership positions. Chen was monitoring his stopwatch and radio communications simultaneously. Intelligence indicated that the targets were showing signs of preparing to move, which meant their window of opportunity was closing rapidly. The spotter found himself silently hoping that Marcus would succeed, despite his earlier skepticism about the entire operation. Marcus felt the familiar calm that had always come over him during the most challenging shots of his hunting career. His breathing was controlled and steady, his heart rate was slow and regular, and his mind was focused entirely on the task at hand. Unlike the pressure he had felt when first agreeing to attempt this shot, Marcus now felt confident and ready. The moment arrived exactly as Marcus had anticipated. All three targets were positioned perfectly, the wind conditions were stable, and the lighting was optimal. Marcus squeezed the trigger with the smooth, steady pressure his father had taught him decades earlier, feeling the rifle recoil against his shoulder as the bullet began its journey toward the target area. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the canyon as the bullet traveled toward its destination. At a muzzle velocity of over 2,800 feet per second, the bullet would reach the first target in less than a second. But to Chen, watching through binoculars, time seemed to stretch endlessly as he waited to see the results of the impossible shot. The bullet struck the first target's center mass, passing completely through his body with enough remaining velocity to continue toward the second target. The man collapsed immediately, killed instantly by the impact. Chen could barely believe what he was seeing as the same bullet continued its trajectory toward the second target location. The bullet struck the second target while he was still trying to process the sound of the gunshot and the fall of his companion. The impact was slightly off-center due to the bullet's altered trajectory after passing through the first target, but it was still lethal. The second target fell backward into the crack in the rock formation, also killed instantly. Chun was speechless as he watched the bullet continue toward the third and most distant target. By this point, the bullet had traveled over 800 meters and had passed through two human targets, yet it still maintained enough velocity and accuracy to complete the impossible shot that Marcus had envisioned. The third target had begun to move when he heard the gunshot, but he was too slow to escape the bullet that had already traveled so far and accomplished so much. The impact struck him in the upper chest, knocking him backward off the rocky ledge where he had been positioned. The man who had been responsible for so many coalition casualties was eliminated by the same bullet that had already taken the lives of his two companions. The silence that followed was absolute. Chen stared through his binoculars at the three locations where moments earlier there had been dangerous enemy combatants planning attacks against coalition forces. Now, there was nothing but stillness and the profound quiet that follows extraordinary violence. Marcus lowered his rifle and looked at Chen, whose face showed a mixture of amazement, disbelief, and professional respect. The spotter had witnessed something that challenged everything he thought he knew about the limits of marksmanship and the possibilities of precision shooting. Radio communications confirmed what Chen had observed through his binoculars. All three targets had been eliminated with a single shot. The intelligence analysts monitoring the situation could barely believe the reports they were receiving, and requests for confirmation came repeatedly over the radio. The news spread through forward operating base Thunder with the speed of wildfire. Soldiers who had been following the sniper team's efforts with great interest were now talking about the cook who had accomplished what the world's best snipers had been unable to achieve. The story grew with each telling, but the basic facts were so extraordinary that no embellishment was necessary. Captain Rodriguez received the report with a mixture of relief and amazement. Her decision to allow Marcus to attempt the shot had been based more on desperation than confidence. Yet somehow it had resulted in the elimination of three high-value targets who had been threatening coalition operations throughout the region. The professional snipers who had spent the previous week failing to accomplish this mission were gracious in acknowledging Marcus's success, though they remained somewhat puzzled about how he had succeeded where they had failed. Chen's detailed report of the shot would become legendary in military sniper circles, discussed and analyzed by experts who struggled to understand how such an extraordinary feat had been possible. Marcus returned to his kitchen that afternoon as if nothing unusual had happened. He prepared the evening meal for the base with the same attention to detail and care that he had always shown. Those soldiers who came through the chow line treated him with a new level of respect and curiosity. The impact of Marcus's shot extended far beyond the immediate elimination of three dangerous targets. News of the extraordinary marksmanship spread through intelligence networks, reaching insurgent groups throughout the region. The psychological effect was exactly what military strategists had hoped for. Potential leaders became more cautious about exposing themselves, and recruitment became more difficult when word spread about the coalition's apparent ability to eliminate multiple targets with impossible precision. Military analysts studying the shot concluded that it represented a unique combination of environmental conditions, precise timing, and exceptional marksmanship that would be nearly impossible to replicate intentionally. The alignment of targets, wind conditions, and other factors had created a brief window where Marcus's shot became possible, but only someone with his particular background and instincts had recognized and seized the opportunity. Marcus never sought recognition for his achievement. He declined interviews with military journalists and requests to demonstrate his marksmanship for visiting officials. To him, the shot had been a job that needed to be done, and he had done it using skills his father had taught him and experience gained during years of hunting in the Montana mountains. The rifle Marcus used for the shot was later examined by ballistics experts who confirmed that the bullet had indeed passed through all three targets while maintaining enough velocity and accuracy to remain lethal throughout its journey. The trajectory analysis showed that the shot had been planned with extraordinary precision and executed with remarkable skill. Chen returned to his regular sniper duties with a new perspective on the relationship between formal training and natural ability. His report on Marcus's shot became required reading at advanced sniper schools, where instructors used it to illustrate the importance of understanding environmental conditions and thinking creatively about seemingly impossible challenges. Forward Operating Base Thunder continued its operations with significantly reduced threat levels in the surrounding area. The elimination of the three senior insurgent commanders had disrupted enemy operations throughout the region, leading to a period of relative calm that allowed coalition forces to focus on reconstruction and humanitarian efforts. Marcus Thompson continued serving as the base cook for the remainder of his deployment, preparing meals and maintaining morale among the soldiers under his care. He never attempted another shot like the one that made him famous, and he never needed to. His single moment of extraordinary marksmanship had accomplished more than most soldiers achieve in entire careers. Years later, when Marcus returned to Montana and resumed civilian life, he rarely spoke about his military service or the shot that had made him a legend. He returned to hunting in the mountains where his father had taught him to shoot, carrying the same old Winchester rifle that had belonged to his grandfather. The story of the cook who succeeded where elite snipers had failed became part of military lore, told and retold in bases around the world. New recruits heard about Marcus Thompson and learned that sometimes the most important qualifications for extraordinary achievement aren't found in training manuals or technical specifications, but in the quiet confidence that comes from understanding your environment and trusting your instincts when the moment demands action. The impossible shot that eliminated 3 targets with a single bullet stands as a reminder that in the unpredictable world of combat, heroes can emerge from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the person best equipped to handle an extraordinary challenge is the one who approaches it with the simplest tools and the most fundamental skills.